Hello, I'm Ellie and I'm a Blackletter Calligraphy artist. Today we're going to be doing a workshop where you can learn to write using a broad-edged pen and hopefully create some cool artwork for yourself. Here's some of the artworks I've created. So these are digital prints based on originals that I've created. Basically this is the same alphabet, it's the fracture Blackletter alphabet, and this is a repeat pattern using Textura. Today we're going to be working with the fracture. Here's some more examples of my work. Do a lot of circled calligrams, some abstract designs, and I even make greetings cards. So this is gold foiled. So these are the tools we're going to be using today. We've got some masking tape, 2 pencils, a ruler, a Zig calligraphy marker, and this has 2 ends. We're going to be using the thicker one. So that's about 3.5mm at the top. It's a felt pen, so it's really good for practice and learning. These are just spare ones of that. We've got 2 Pilot parallel pens. You don't have to have this, but it might be beneficial to you. It's a wider tip, it's 6mm, and in here it's got a cartridge. So this is filled with ink, and then you'll be able to write freely without having to top it up. So it's basically a step up from these Zig calligraphy markers. And then we've got a colour pencil, black colour pencil, or a black fine liner marker, which we're going to use alongside the pencils. So there's going to be a few different techniques we can do with the workshop. I'm going to teach you how to use the Zig calligraphy marker first, and then we're going to talk about how you can use pencils if you don't have access to a broad nib pen. I'm also going to be using the Artgecko paper stock for this workshop, and it's really good for calligraphy, especially the thick, the Pilot parallel pens with ink, because it holds quite a lot. The cartridge paper's got like a fine tooth to it, but yeah, it doesn't bleed, which is really, really beneficial and hard to find when doing calligraphy. So we're going to be starting with the Zig calligraphy marker, but first up we're going to draw some guides. So to start off, we're just going to draw one simple guide. We don't have to measure anything for this practice test. So I've just drawn 2 faint pencil lines there. Now take your Zig calligraphy marker or your broad nibbed pen and just try and draw some vertical lines with the pen that fit inside those guides. Now I'm holding the pen at a 45-degree angle, so if I just dab it on the paper, you can see, if you zoom in on that section, that it's at a 45-degree angle to the paper. And what this does is it gives a slightly thinner line, and it means you're able to twist and turn in other directions. So just have a play with your broad edge pen if you've never used one before. See what happens if you turn it away from 45 degrees as well. So if you do it at straight 90, you get a straight fatter line. If you do it at 0, a really thin line. So just have a little play around. Try and work within the guidelines and just see what the pen can do. You can also use the very tip of the pen, so the corner edges, as well as keeping the entire nib on the paper. You can use the corner just for the thinner strokes, which gives you a bit more control. I always find this is really good for warming up, is just to create some guidelines and just practice any strokes that your hand wants to take. So continue with that, fill the paper if you fancy, just get used to the nib, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so when we are talking about calligraphy, there are certain things that you need to know before you start. There's certain ways to set up the paper, the guidelines, and ways to hold the pen, the pressure to use, the shoulder stands, the position that you're sat in. It's all very important when you're writing. So, to begin with, I'm going to show you this anatomy of calligraphy, which is something that I drew up just to show a bit more information and hopefully give you a greater understanding of the strokes that you should be making to create the letter forms. So on the side here we've got the nib widths. Now as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that sit between these two lines. Now these two lines are called the baseline, shown here, and the X height, or mean line. So top line is the mean line, that is the baseline, and the distance in between is called the X height. Now as you can see, all the lowercase letters fit within this X height between these two lines. Some letters, as you know, H, L, G and Y and P, they all are falling above and below that X height position. So the letters that go above it are called ascenders. This top part of the letter is called the ascender, and this bottom part of these letters are called descenders. And this is because they ascend the mean line and they descend the baseline. So that's important to know initially because it'll make your writing look super neat, compact and uniform. So going back to the nib widths, we've got 5 in the centre, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the distance for the ascenders is 2 nib widths, and descenders again 2 nib widths. Now this is a standard 252, a standard module for writing blackletter calligraphy. Now we don't have to stick to 252. If you want, after the session you can experiment with other modules such as 272, which means that 2 nib widths, then 7 rather than 5, meaning it'll extend, and then 2 more for the baseline. And what that'll do is it'll elongate the centre X height of the letters, which gives them a taller and narrower look. I'll show you more about that later. For now, that's all we're going to look at for this. Feel free to pause and study it properly. A 45-degree angle for the pen will be really beneficial when doing blackletter, and see how all the letters have these stems, vertical stems, and we'll go into that in more detail. And now I want to show you a picture of the alphabet. So this is something I prepared earlier. As you can see, there's very faint vertical lines on this, which just keep all the letters in check. It keeps all the stems as vertical as can be, which gives it the solid blackletter look. Now, again, I've put the modules at the side just for a guide. But if you want to pause this, save a screenshot maybe, then you've got a reference for the Fracture Minuscules alphabet that we're going to be working with today. So this is one of 4 main categories of blackletter calligraphy. In my opinion, it's one of the most beautiful. It's got a bit of decoration and flourishes to it that you don't necessarily get with the more rigid textura or other blackletter forms. So it's super versatile, and I'm going to be using that one today. I've also got this sheet, which is the same alphabet, but it shows you the directions in which to create the strokes. Again, pause or screenshot this page to save for later. I'm going to be talking through this in more detail. Cool, so before we start on the letter formations, I'm going to show you another trick which you can use if you don't have the Zig calligraphy marker or a broad edge pen of your choice. feel free to use the Pilot Parallel pen or the Zig marker going forward, but you can also use 2 pencils. So if you align them perfectly, make sure that these points are exactly in line so you can rest it on the paper if you like. Keep it in line, and then what we're going to do is tape them together, and this will create a broad edge nib that you can then fill in later. So grab your masking tape. This is a new one, so it's going to take a while to get it off. Any tape will do, but masking tape is easily removable. So once the pens are aligned there, just move that back a little bit, tape them together. There you go, and you've got your very own makeshift broad edge nib. Feel free to do another part at the top. I think I might do that just to keep it a bit sturdier. I'm going to use a different tape just because that was being a bit difficult. If you're interested, this is paper tape. So it's good for the environment too. So there we go. Now with this one, a similar thing happens. So if you draw a straight vertical line, you can see you get 2 strokes. Move the angle of your hand. Now this is more of a 30-degree angle. And then use one side of the pencil to fill in the edges. Now this is where the coloured pencil or fine liner will come in handy. Once we've written everything, you'll be able to colour it in properly and create a black letter style without actually using a broad edge pen. So this does take a little longer than using ink, but you can see how it is possible using just pencils. Now if you wanted to go even further, you could stick another pencil in between so you've got a wider point, but make sure that it's not actually touching the paper. So you'd stick it together just a little bit lower than the other 2 and still tape all 3 together. So if you're doing this at home, just have a bit more of a play with it. Try and do some vertical strokes. If you're not using pencils, I'd try and do the same thing because it's really good practice to get those vertical lines, and try and keep even pressure on all sides of the nib or on both pencils. At the moment this is quite confusing, but if we take our pencil and just join up from the beginning, those 2, keep the diagonal angle, and you can see you've got chunky forms being created that represent the stems of the letters that we talked about earlier. So have a play with all these different tools. Yeah, practice doing those vertical strokes and maintaining control of the pen. A tip for posture: drop your shoulders. If your shoulders are hunched over, you want to relax them and keep your arms loose. Don't grip the pen too tight. Keep a loose grip and just let it glide across the paper, gliding down. Now we don't go up, we always pull the strokes down the paper. Pull down. Try moving your wrist as well. The angle of your wrist is important, as that's how we differentiate very different strokes. can do the same thing with the pencils. Move your wrist, don't grip too tight, and you'll see different shapes are formed. This is a really fun technique to warm up. So have a little play, keep doing that for as long as you wish, and then we'll move on to creating the alphabet. Okay, so we're gonna leave this here as a guide, just in the top corner. And hopefully, if you've got a screenshot, you can look at it on the screen while you're writing. So I'm just gonna work in the bottom right corner here so you can still see a bit of the guide at the top. Now take your ruler. This is where I'm going to teach you how to create the guides. Just start up a little bit further. So take guides. I'm going to use the black coloured pencil so you can see what I'm doing, but feel free to use just a normal pencil. Now draw the mean line, which is the top of the X height. Just one line, and then take it away. That's the only line that you're going to do without measuring anything. Now take whichever pen you're using, get the nib that you're going to be writing with, and using the pen, we're going to draw the nib widths, and that is how you determine the size of your guides. So, putting this end, aligning it with the top of the mean line, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because the centre part has 5 nib widths. Now take your ruler back and draw in the baseline, which, as you remember, is where it's the line that all the letters sit on. This line here, where they all stop. So fill that in, and then you've got the main size of the grid, and this works for any pen size you've got. To show you, I'll do it with this as well. So I'll draw the mean line in, and then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now obviously it's harder to see because it doesn't have the end points, but once you fill them in, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nib widths, and then we draw the baseline on. Make sure it's straight on this end as well. You can, if you really want to be accurate, you can measure this side, which is 3.5 centimetres, and make sure that the ruler lines up so that your writing stays straight for the entire length. So now you can see that this X height section is a lot larger than this one, and that's because the width of this is much wider than the width of this. Okay, so back to this one. We're going to go further, and we're going to go do the 2 nib widths for the ascenders and descenders. So working from the mean line up, we've got 1, 2, and then from down, 1, 2. And now you can draw in the final 2 guidelines. And there you go, you've got your guides set up. Now you can do this again with any single pen or nib of your choice, but this is what we're going to be working with today. You can do it over and over as many times as you need. Now to jump right in would be silly. We're going to start with the basic strokes. So you see how a lot of the letters have a vertical stem that flicks out to the left and then it curves round. You can see it on the A, on this part of the A, the B, C, D, E. F, but not as wide as these other letters. This F doesn't come out to the right at all, it goes down into the descender onto the left. The G, the main part of the G, does the same thing as all these letters here. So as you can see, there is a pattern on all the letters which gives it its uniformity across the entire alphabet. There are certain letters which are anomalies, such as the S, the Z, but we'll come to them at the time. So we're going to start with the basic letter A. Now, there's a few letters which use this exact same formation. So I'm just going to label with them a dot. We've got the A, the single story, not the double story. So the double story A is a little bit more complex. We'll come to that another time. So the A uses that single shape, which looks very much like the O. So if you try and look for all the letters that use the O as the base, you can see straight up here, the G does exactly the same. We've got the Q, the first part of it, and the first line just carries on down. The C. The U. Okay, that's what we're going to work with for now. We've got that bowl shape, so if we come back to the calligraphy sheet, you can see that inside the space, the white inside a closed off shape is called a counter. Okay, so if we start with, let's start with O to begin with, because it's the base letter for those other letters. Now if we look at this O here, you can see it's got the ductus, which are these little letters and directional strokes. So we go straight down and flick off to the left as stroke 1. Stroke 2 starts just here, just above where that last line joins, and we go around to the right. So this is where you go 1 stroke, pen off paper, 2 stroke, pen off paper, 3, pen off paper, 4 and 5. So we're just going to go straight in and try that. I'll show you the strokes and you can copy at home. So, see whereabouts on the guidelines that these letters start. The start of the O doesn't start exactly on the mean line. Oh, I'm slightly off screen. It doesn't start exactly on the mean line. It starts a little bit further down, probably about the 4th nib up. So we're going to go straight down to the right, and then back onto the blue section that you've already done, and then bring it off to the right. And this is where the wrist movement can come in handy that you practiced earlier. Now, joining back up to the top, there's this very slight overlap, and then we bring right over there, a slight curve. You see that little bit of white that is shown there. And joining back up to stroke 5, from here and straight down to join the edge of that stroke. And then you've got your O. So I'm going to do that again, but zoomed in. Okay, so not right at the top, and you want a 45-degree angle. Bring it down, off to the left. Back over the blue, and bring it off to the right. And then change your hand angle. See how the pen is no longer at 45 degrees. It's at a different angle. So you can keep it 45, like this, or twist it and create a bit more of a variety of the stroke widths. And then join it back up, you'd bring a final vertical line to join up with the second stroke. And you've got your O. So just repeat this for the O again and again until you feel like you've got the hang of it. Now there is one part that I've missed out from the induction there. See number 3? It just adds an extra corner to that stroke on the side. So you can do this at the end or during, and you just do a little stroke with the left side, of the tip of your nib. So practice going onto one corner when you're writing. See how I lift the right side up and it creates a point. It's really useful, but it's quite advanced, so don't worry if you can't do that. So while we're here, I'm gonna just quickly show you how to do the O with the pencils as well for those who are using those. So again, don't start right at the very top because we're gonna have to leave room for the top section. A little bit further, probably just a little bit above. Maybe the left nib should be, left corner should be in line with the 4th. So we go straight down at 45-degree angle and come off to the left just as it hits the second one up from the baseline. You can do that if you fancy. And then this actually creates a great skeleton where you can see how the stroke is meant to be made. You can see the overlap, so really that's where it would join up. And we go back to here, again, change the angle slightly so it's not exactly in line with that. And we come down, a little bit of a curve. And then starting from here, straight down to join up with this bit. So as you can see, that this forms an O just like these ones here. And if we want to do the little corner, we can do. Now take the coloured pencil and just go over all of those pencil lines. And you can see you've got the O formed. Cool, so back to the letters. We're going to have a little look again at the worksheet. And you see how the A, it does the same as the O, 4 strokes, and then the 5th one comes off that side to create the last little leg of the A. So let's practice that. I'll show you with the pencils first this time, just so you can get a better idea of how the letter is formed. So again, start at the same place, straight down and come off to the left, overlap to the right, join up if it makes you be able to see the shape better, and then to the top and down. Now you have basically gone O. I was a little bit light on that side. You need to make sure you're pressing on both sides equally. So we've got another O. And then to make the A, we just come back like we did here to come right. We're doing it again. And we come right. And then you create a little flick at the end. So once we colour that one in, we've got a fully fledged A. There we go. So I'd recommend this technique for beginners because you can really see the skeleton of the shape, and with it being a little bit of a wider nib, it's easier to create an accurate letter. I do know that using a pen with a 3.5mm nib is a little bit harder for first time users, so if you're not comfortable with this, don't worry, use the pencils and you'll get there eventually. So to show it with the pen, we go down at the O, off to the right at the top, and then down we've got the O, and we just quickly bring that out to the side, and then to create that flick of the A, I just use the corner quickly up like that. You don't have to do that, but it's an added touch, especially if it's the end of a word, like delta. Bring that up and you can create an extra flourish which exemplifies the word. So, next one. Now we've got the hang of the O shape and the A. I'm sure G will come, but we'll do that when we do ascenders. We're going to stick within the X height for now for the base form of the letters. We're going to go with an I. One vertical stroke and one off to the right. So it's kind of the first one, but it starts differently at the beginning. So follow my lead on the pencils. We're going to start a little bit higher. This right hand side, keep it at 45 degrees. This right hand side nib corner needs to be touching the mean line, the top line of the middle section. And then we're going to bring it off to the right slightly, and then readjust and bring it vertically down to the same point where these come off. Just below, just at the bottom of that second nib. And you can actually, if you want further guides, you can draw this in just like that. So you know all along when you're practicing where to bring it off. And then again, we join up just above. Don't want to do it there because then you have a little gap when you colour it in. You have a little in point there. So you want to go a bit above it, come down, bring it right over and round, and then finish it like that. And funnily enough, this actually does well for the tittle, which if you look here, the dot on an eye is called a tittle. So you can do that, or you can do a little rectangle or diamond, lozenge, whatever you want to call it. And we're just going to colour that in like we did the rest. So that is how to form the I, which is the base of many of the letters. So can you recognise any? We've got the B. It starts a bit higher, but it's the same principle. D, E, H, N, especially. This part of the M and the N are particularly like the I because it starts off on the left and pulls over to the right. The ascenders don't always do that. You can alter the variation so it comes off from the right and comes down, but on this variation we're going to do it from the right hand side. So back to the sketches. What shall we do now? Let's do the vowels first, I think. So working with the pencils, we're going to do an E. It's going to start the same way as this, and we're going to pull down vertically off to the left, as you know by now, and then off to the right. Now, rather than going like this, as you do for the O, we're going to go straight down at a bit more of a sharp angle and then bring it round. So if this goes slightly over the mean line, that's okay, because it's all about balance. Blackletter is about balance and balancing the blacks of the letters with the white of the negative space. If we were going to keep that down, bring that down a little bit, that apex of the E, we're going to have to move this down, which then would leave too much white space here. It just opens up a little bit too much. You don't have to bring the crossbar down as low as this. I'll do another example. I think it's actually quite nice when you keep it tight to the shape. So we'll stick with this one. And I'm just gonna go over those last two letters with the pen. So again, the I. And what you should do is practice these one after another, because you won't get it right first time. And there's even some when I do it and I've just not quite concentrated or done it slowly enough to get it accurate. And now the E. So don't worry if they're not exactly the same, but the aim of the game is to continue practicing so they become very uniform and they do start looking very similar. If you've done quite a lot and you're not happy with some of them, ask yourself why. Why am I not happy? For this one, I think I came down far too much and then brought it in a little bit too high, so I'm not happy with that one. Personally, I think this is my favourite. Now, I'm just going to draw some more lines. You should do the same. So, rather than just doing one and practicing, let's draw several together. So, the mean line. And then, do you remember, I'm going to do it in pencil because I think that's easier for you to understand the form of the letters. So, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One, two. Apologies, that was slightly messy, but for the point of showing you the form of the letters, I think that'll do for now. So feel free to create lots of guides down your page, create as many as you want, and the more you create, the more practice you can get in. Now a trick for this is, if you create an A4 page of guides with the nib that you're using, scan the page in and print it out. Now it might not be as good on printer paper, but if you are able to print onto cartridge or any Artgecko papers that are thick enough that the ink won't spill. If you do it in pencil, it's not as much of an issue, but yeah, if you don't want the ink to bleed or soak through the paper, I'd recommend using thicker stock. So we're going to move on and look at ascenders. So we've got B, D, F, H, K, L, T. Now you may notice that T isn't as tall as these other ascenders. These ascenders all reach the ascender line, whereas the T just sits a little bit above the X height. That is just the rules. So we're going to work on ascenders. We're going to work with B and H to begin with. So take your pencils, tape pencils, and I'm just gonna move that up a little bit. Yeah, so on the B, I'll just go through this again. Rather than starting on the left-hand side like the I, we're gonna start and come off from the right and down. So make sure the left corner is on the ascender line. Come in from the right, straight down and off to the left. So you get a little curvy top and bottom. And then the same way that we worked with the O and the A, we're going to start a bit higher up and bring it off to the right to create the curve that the B sits on. Now for this part, we start at the top of the X height here, and we just do the little curve that we did with the O and the A. Turn them up, and then the final bit, can you work out? We're just gonna go from here and join up at the bottom. So a good thing to keep in mind with Blackletter is the space inside the counter should be the same width as the nibs. So I'll do an example. I'll just call that in so you can see properly. An example of one that will be wrong. If you come in from the right and down, bring that too far over so that when you do this, the middle section is way too wide. You can see there that this one's very uniform, it's very balanced. White, black, white, black, white. Whereas this one looks to have a really thin stem here. A really thick counter and a really thin stem here. When really the stems are the same thickness as this, but these look thicker and darker because there's less of a gap in between. So that's really important to keep an eye on. And to help with this, you have to notice things that you're doing yourself. You have to be critical of your work. So, now we've done that, we know that to avoid this, we don't come around on this part as far. We only stay close. And this comes with practice. You just have to repeat it again and again. So come down, round, up, and down here. And you get better each time you do it. So we're going to work on the H now, which doesn't have the bottom connected. I'll get the paper out for you again. So the H starts off like the B, but doesn't come as far around, and you'll see now why being conscious of that is really important. So the H, again, start on the ascender line with the right corner. Come into the left and down. And then rather than coming out like this, because we know it's going to connect, we're only going to do it very gently, like that. So it's a very slight curve. You can see here, very slight curve, whereas usually it would come out to here if it was the B. Can you see that? So then we're going to carry on and do the top bit, the top curve, and then rather than coming around and joining it up like the B, we're going to come past the baseline, just into the descender line to give it a curve that's a little bit lower and it sits below the main letters. Again, I'm going to call that in. So you can see on the H, it's similar to this first B. The centre is as wide as the stem width. Now, of course, you can be doing this with your broad edge pens, just as I have here. I'm just using this technique to show you at a larger scale. Something that this highlight powder pen's really good for. It's 6mm and it's really good if you're learning because you can see more what you're doing wrong and where to go right next. So back to the H. There's also a variety where it doesn't go below the baseline. Follow the same technique as to begin with. Don't come around too far on this bottom foot here. And then do the same thing with this foot so it matches. 2 little feet. And again, once you shade that in, you'll see the letter is very balanced. And there's a variation from this with the lower flourish there. This is particularly popular with the fracture Blackletter script, but you can do it like this as well. So if we take away those, you can see B, H, H, very, very similar. There's only a slight difference at the bottom. Great, now we're going to work on the descenders. So the examples I'm going to go with are the G and the Q. And we'll look at some unusual ones like the P afterwards. So G and Q. And now? Okay, so we're going to do the same thing again, but with the G, which, as you can see, has got the same formation as the O on top, and the descender just comes from the side. So we're going to work on that and the Q. So using the double tape pencils again, remember how it went with the O, off to the left and then to the right. So initially you've got that O shape straight away. And then with this double story G, which is different to the standard version, but I think the loop tail on this is much nicer. You're gonna just go from the left side and swing it round horizontally in the descender area to finish at the descender line. So once you add the little serif on there and colour that in, you see how it fits with the same weight as the H and the B. So onto the Q. Similar start to the O, except for the final stroke down carries on past the X height baseline and touches the descender line. So same again, super simple, done it before. And then once you reach this point, go past the edge where you'd normally finish and pull it out to the right just as the left corner of the nib touches the descender line. Cool, so now you can see, if we cover those ones up because they're the wrong attempts, we've got the B, H, G and Q, and they've all got a very similar counter space compared with their stem width, which keeps them uniform. So the next task will be to create a word. Now we've got a word example from Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. So we're going to be writing, nice work, Bone Daddy. So we're going to start with the word nice, and you can see how to put into practice what you've learned with the individual letters to create a word. You can see on the example with the anatomy here, how the space in between the letters is exactly the same as the width of the stems, which when you zoom out and look at the word as a whole, creates a united, uniform image. So I'll start on a new piece of paper. So, same as we've done before, make your guides. Start with the top mean line and then draw your guides in the side. So if you've got the screenshot up, refer back to the letters N-I-C-E, and we're gonna put them together into a word so you can see how it's formed. Now can you see how the C there just joined up nicely on this left pull out to the edge of where the I finishes, and that's how you can link all the letters up nicely and save face on the balance of the entire word. So if you're using pencils, I'd recommend colouring this in so you can properly see the spacing. If you're using pen, I'll just quickly do an example. You should be able to look for the whites and the darks in the letters and see whether you think that it balances on the paper. Now to me, on this, there's a little bit too much white space here, just between the I and the C, which doesn't keep it together as one word. So on the next practice, I'd probably alter that and make a conscious effort not to leave that space. So perhaps start the I over a little bit more to the right and be conscious of bringing the C in. So now, even when I've done that first stroke, I can see that the gaps in between equal more or less to the filled in colour of the stems. Already you can see the improvement. It's more visible as an entire entity rather than 4 separate letters. So I'm just going to colour this in to show you what it should look like. Okay, so practice this as much as you need to. I'd say this space is probably a little bit too big. We could probably close that gap a little bit there as well. So I'm just going to repeat the same exercise until I get it how I want it. Don't be afraid to change the angle of your wrist as well. But try and keep a 45-degree angle on the pen at the vertical strokes. So you can see this word on the right is a lot more uniform than the one on the left. It's just a bit better spacing, and you can always alter this and fill in the gaps with embellishments and flourishes. So do this with all the words. We're going to say do work next. So just follow the alphabet. I'll leave that there so you can just see the W. There's 2 options on the worksheet. Now I'm going to briefly show you how to do the uppercase letters for N, W, B and D. We've not got time to go into it properly in detail, but for the purpose of this exercise I'm going to use the capital letter just of the phrase we're using. So uppercase letters, they don't fall, if you check back at this sheet, they fall right in the centre of the mean line and the ascender line. So we're going to just draw in another line, which is 1 nib width. And that's where it'll fall. So feel free to rewind and replay that. I'm going to zoom in slightly for the next one, just so you can figure out the strokes. I'll even put it on there in red for you. So it's 1, 2, 3, and this one determines the size of the bowl here. And then bring this one up, 4, 5, 6. So as you can see, you only use a thin part, the corner, for this upstroke for number 4. And that's how you form the B that we're going to be using. You can also add a little diamond there to fill the space a little more. So after that, we're going to carry on the word bone, and you know this one, the O. Cool, now on to the D, which is going to be quite similar to the uppercase B. Just watch the strokes I do and then replay as many times as you need. Okay, so see how the D and the B, the curve falls slightly below the baseline, which is absolutely fine. So as you remember, we've done the A, it's very similar to the O. Make sure you don't leave too much room between the uppercase letter and the lowercase, otherwise it can seem quite detached. So we've got the O and then make the A. Now we've not practiced the D's yet, and this is the one that we're going to be doing with a curved ascender coming in from the top. So start off as usual, pull out to the left and then to the right with the overlap, and then with the right corner touching the ascender line, we're going to swoop round and finish with the right corner on the top of the X height on the mean line, and from there we can just pull straight down. Again, be wary of the space in between, the counter space. Make sure it's similar to the space in between each letter. So this bit, and this bit should be very similar widths to create the overall impression of a black, white set of letters. And then same again for this one. You can fill this bottom triangle space with the flick from onto the left. And same again, pull it round and straight down. So the next one's a Y. Again, not touched on this yet. We're gonna do the one that's similar, very similar to this G, where the stem pulls straight down then out to the right. So I'll leave that there for you to see. We're gonna pull up as if it's an I, take that guide, and then now I've done the first bit, literally just looks like an I. We're gonna create this small little hand at the top. So pull over, don't attach it to the left hand side, and then make sure this gap's the right width, pull down straight, and when you hit the foot that attaches as the eye, rotate your wrist and the angle of the nib to 30 degrees and pull out to the side, and then you can create the nice little tail that matches up and hits the bottom of the descender line. So when you look at the word as a whole, especially these two words next to each other, you can see the uniformity and the space balance throughout the whole words. So I'm just going to colour these in so you can see what it looks like. Now you're going to be a bit more precise on the colouring in, and for the final one I will be as well. Just want to reiterate that if you're using a pen, obviously you won't have to do any of the colouring in, and you should be able to create these strokes as they are. My recommendation is to use the Pilot Parallel with a 6mm nib, just because it's a little bit wider and you'll get a more impressive outcome. So if I was to go over it like this, you can see that it just takes one stroke and you've already got the text coloured in. It's a bit harder to get to grips with than the pencils and less forgiving because you can't go over it as much. You can use the corner of these pens just to straighten up the edges, like so. But personally I think that the double-edged pencil, the two pencils taped together, are really good for beginners to get the practice in, and it means you can do it at a larger size and create more accurate work. So now we've done a bit of practice, we're going to go straight in and work on the layout. So you've got a blank page. This is an A3 size. If you want to create a larger poster, if you're working with a smaller nib size, you might want to shrink the paper size so it fits well framed within the dimensions. So as usual, start by drawing your guides up and visualise where you want the words to be on the page. Because there's 4 words, we're going to do nice work and then bone daddy underneath. So make sure you leave quite a substantial border around the edge, because there's nothing worse than work being too close to the side, and if you wanted to frame it then it'll be cut off by the mount board. So I'm going to work straight into the centre. I'm going to use pencil for the guides so I can rub them out afterwards. Okay, so I've created the guides, they're super faint, but what I have done is, as you can see, nice work doesn't have any descenders that go right to the descender line. So similar to as I've done here, I'm going to create the top of this ascender line to align exactly with the descender line, so there's not as much space in between the 4 words. So we've not done the uppercase N yet, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. Make sure you put that central line in for the uppercase, in between the ascender and the mean line. Same goes for down here. If you want to, you can replay that and put it in slow motion so you can get the strokes right. Now the uppercase W, we're going to create a similar stroke as in the N, and then it's similar in the B here, so it'll all look like one cohesive piece. And the K, we've not touched on this, but if you start at the ascender line, Cool, so the first two words are in. You can either colour them now or wait until you've got the rest of the text in, which is what I'm going to do to make sure that the layout is how I want it, and if anything's wrong I can rub it out and start again. If you are working with pen, then obviously it's less forgiving, but you can work on the layout again and again until you get it the way you'd like it to be. And here you could even exaggerate it a little bit and create a longer descent on the Y to frame the page a bit. Similarly, you can balance this out by having this long descent and the exclamation mark by accentuating the flourishes on the B. So the bottom you could bring in a bit further from the side. The K could create an extra little flourish at the top. So if you're happy with the layout and you don't want to rework anything, or if you're working in pen and you've done it and you don't want to redo the text, you can start to use a black colour pencil or your black fine liner to colour it in. For time I'm going to use this, but feel free to use this or any other colour you'd like. Fab, so now that's all coloured in, or if you've used pen it was already finished, you can go back and rub out these guidelines with a pencil and then you'll have a finished piece of work. There's also something you can add in, so using your broad edge pen or nib you can add tiny little diamonds. And what I'm doing to get that little point at the end is just pulling down onto the left hand tip